Each and every year I read books to transport me worlds, cry, laugh, discover, and understand the world just a little more. And every year I attempt to narrow down my favorites. G'day book friends, each and every year I attempt to narrow down my favorite books of the year. Of the 61 books I read this year, 9 of those have been added to my favorites list. I love making lists, and here's what qualifies a book to become one of my favorites. If I think about the book long after I turn the final page, if the book causes raw emotions, if it causes me to cry with lots and lots of tears, always tears. If the book makes me see the world in a different way through a new lens, and if I can't stop talking about it non-stop and recommending it to people. I work in a bookstore, so this happens frequently. And without further ado, here are my favorite books of 2025. And if you stick around to the end, I will reveal my number one book of 2025. I'm actually going to start with a couple of honorable mentions, and the first is called Dusk by Robbie Arnott. It follows the story of a puma who is killing shepherds and livestock, and twins Iris and Floyd are out of work and out of money and hear about the bounty for killing the puma named Dusk and reluctantly join the hunt. Robbie Arnott is maybe one of the most beautiful writers I have ever come across, and this was definitely up there with one of my favorite books, except one of Robbie Arnott's other books made my favorites list this year, and I didn't want to include the same author on my favorites list twice. However, Dusk by Robbie Arnott is also fantastic. There is just contrast, there is emotion, there is raw beauty, and Robbie Arnott may be one of my favorite authors on the planet. The final book on my honorables mentioned is Juice by Tim Winton. This was one of the hardest novels I've read in a long time. Lives in that climate fiction space, but Tim Winton, and this is the magic of Tim Winton, where he will write something and the lessons that you learn from reading something from Tim Winton come in the weeks, the months, the years to come. And I've thought about this book over and over again throughout this year, even though I didn't enjoy it wholeheartedly. It's set in the not so distant future, and it's a man who is traveling with a child and they get captured. And he tells his entire story to the man that's captured him. And it's a dystopian sort of reality of where the world is going in terms of a place that is too hot. In the summers, they live underground because it's too dangerous to live above the ground with the damaging storms. And during the winter is where they do all of what they can to survive. Society has collapsed, and it follows the lens of this young man turning into a man, turning into an old man who is discovering that the people from the past generations have completely and utterly destroyed the world for what it is. And honestly, it's a lot more nuanced than that. I found that I didn't enjoy this novel at all, but I found the words important and the story important and the message important, and that is usually enough for me to put it on my favorites. I just didn't overly enjoy the story, but I'm starting to realize that really important books are not designed to be enjoyed. All right, here are my favorites. First up is The Golden Spruce by John Valiant. This follows the story of a cold winter night in 1977 in British Columbia. On Haida Island, a man called Grant Hadwin decided to perform a shocking act of violence. The victim, a 300-year-old spruce tree standing over 50 meters tall with golden needles. See, the golden spruce is a golden tree that sits amongst normal green trees in a remote area of British Columbia. It held significant meaning for Indigenous people, for the people that know about it. And it's this story of this place, but it's also this story of this tree and the violent act that befallen this tree. It is this storytelling on this different kind of level that John Valiant can do. And this was just, it hooked me from start to finish. And it was just this fantastic telling of a story in this way that it felt like fiction, but you were devastated to find out that it wasn't. And honestly, it's an environmental true crime story of natural wonder, the violence that undertook it, and the ramifications of such action. And I just found it incredibly fascinating. And honestly, this is just filled with emotion, history, and depth. And it certainly made me cry and think about our natural environment in a slightly different way. Next up is Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. It is a memoir of the loss of her husband and the aftermath of grief, loss, and heartbreak of what is a traumatic event in Geraldine Brooks's life. A little bit of backstory on Geraldine Brooks. She wrote a book called Year of Wonder, which was my Year 12 case study novel. And at the time I resented her because I read that novel through like 4 times and I'd never done that with a book before. But also just, I was mad because that was not a story for a 17-year-old. But in retrospect, I really enjoyed it and I think about it quite often, ironically enough. And so when this came through, I decided to pick it up and give it a read. And I was just pleasantly surprised. This takes place in Flinders Island, Tasmania, where she goes to uncover her grief and discover what it is that she is trying to heal within herself. And I just thought, beautiful words. It was a story similar to Joan Didion's A Year of Wonder, but this kind of felt like the Australian version of that in a strange way. And I just thought it was beautiful and it was well told. And if you were ever going through grief of any kind, this would be a great book to pick up. But what I also loved is her description of landscape and a place like Flinders Island. And mostly I connected to it because I lived on the island that was on the other side of Bass Strait called King Island in Tasmania. And it just felt like it held so much of that place. And I loved it for that. And it changed how I think about the world and how I think about things. And this one is certainly the memoir of the year for me. All right, next up is 3 Boys Gone by Mark Smith. I don't have a physical copy of this one, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because it was one of my favorites of the year. This story presents the question, would you save them? And Grace Disher, who is an outdoor education teacher in Australia, taking a group of boys out on a hike, is presented with that question when 3 of the boys run into the surf and she has to make the decision whether to try save them from drowning, drown herself, or remain on the beach and watch in horror. This one hit close to home because it is a trip as an outdoor education teacher that I have done myself with a group of boys. And I knew the locations and I knew the markers and I knew, because that's something that I had thought about in the past. It is a rugged section of coast and it is described beautifully, and the way that he talks about ocean and place, but also the way that Mark uncovers the story of this psychological fast-paced thriller and the aftermath of the next few days for that outdoor education teacher was just done sensationally, truthfully posing the questions that us outdoor education teachers thought of frequently. I've also been fortunate enough to start to get to know Mark over the last few years, and his knowledge on the craft of writing is fantastic. And this was one of my favorite thrillers of the entire year. Next up is The Forsaken by my friend Matt Rogers. This is an advanced reader copy, and this follows the story of Logan Booth, who for a decade has been a contract killer for the CIA, only he hasn't known it. This is Logan uncovering that his entire life up until that point has been a lie, and his mentor and boss has been lying to him the whole way through. This is one of those crime thriller novels that puts you on the edge of your seat, and it's one of those books that you need to turn the next page to find out what is going to happen to these characters. Logan Booth then decides to get vengeful, and he meets this girl named Alice who is a drug addict, and together they face their demons in order to get to the bottom of everything that is unjust. This is a story about justice. This is a story about demons. This is a story about hope, and this story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Next up is The Peak by Sam Guthrie. It's a political thriller and maybe one of the best debuts of 2025. Charlie will do anything to protect his friend Sebastian, and they're both covering secrets. And so when in a meeting, Sebastian has a single word of Mandarin whispered in his ear, he does the unthinkable. So when Charlie starts to try piece it all together, his history in Hong Kong, his history in China, his history with his friend, the world starts to go black and things start to change. Does the world only have 24 hours left? Who's to say? But this is the premise of one of the best novels I read this year. It's fast-paced, it's gritty, it's dark, but it's also filled with knowledge and insight and just almost a brand new world. And this one had me thinking about things in a different way. I'd never really thought about politics in this way. I'd never really thought about writing in this way. And Sam Guthrie just does this fantastic job of sweeping you through this story and holding on to everything that he's told within the pages of his first book. And truly delighted with what this ended up being. And I just felt that more people should know about this book and more people should be reading it. All right, next up is The Burrow by Melanie Chang. This was one of my favorite books of 2025. This follows the story of Amy, Jin, and Lucy isolated in the COVID lockdowns when they buy their daughter Lucy a pet rabbit, and Amy's mother Pauline comes to stay with them and uncovers long buried secrets. It is emotionally raw, it is beautiful, it is relatable, and I just found myself turning these pages and feeling how stuck you can feel in the mundaneness of everything when you feel like you are not in control, and how quickly that life can pass you by, and those things that you wanted and really prioritize at one point fall to the wayside for the new shiny things. And I was enamored by this novel. It caused me to sob, and it was just such simple storytelling in the sense of there wasn't a tremendous amount that happened, but you just felt like there was enough. And as a human, if you strip it all back and think about what it is that you love about story, but what it is that you want in your life, this novel here made me think about things differently, and it made me prioritize certain things slightly differently, particularly those things that I thought were valuable and mattered. And really it comes down to love, time, and the people that you get to spend it with. It deals with the crucial elements of our life: love, loss, grief, family, responsibility, accountability. And I just felt all of that within this really short book here. Anyway, that's The Burrow. All right, my third favorite book of 2025 is The Names by Florence Knapp. And I devoured this book. It was just this really beautiful storytelling, emotional journey. And it reads much in the way that Frederick Backman writes his novel, with this emotional, fragile, on the edge of a knife writing where it can go either way, and it's this beautiful, delicate piece of work. This extraordinary novel asks the question, can the name change a course of a life? In the wake of a storm, Cora with her 9-year-old daughter walk down to the name registry office and try to name her son. Except the problem is that she hesitates. This novel follows alternate realities of Cora having named her son 3 different names. The first is Gordon after her abusive husband. The second is Bear, and the last is Julian. It then follows those alternate realities in 7-year segments, jumping forward as time goes on. And I found myself rooting for all 3 of these characters, and I found myself crying, and I found myself emotionally devastated. And it does include violence, and it does include abuse of Cora, who is the mother of the relationship. And in all 3 of those alternate realities, there is abuse that goes towards Cora in one way, shape, or form from her husband, Gordon Sr. And that is why she hesitated when it comes down to naming her son. It is this beautiful relationship And it poses the what if question. It's like, what if you were named something else? How would your life turn out? Bear's life turned out very different than Julian's, and then very different from Gordon's. But at the same time, those lives were somewhat intertwined. There were some similarities, from the sister to the mother to the father to the relationships that existed within those characters. And I just think that that is this really cool question, that maybe the what ifs don't matter as much as we think the what ifs matter. And The Names by Florence Knapp was one of my favorite books of 2025. All right, my second favorite book of 2025 is Limberlost by Robbie Arnott. We're down to two. This was my second favorite book. This book follows the story of Ned in a long summer who is hunting rabbits and selling their pelts to essentially buy a boat. He is dreaming of open water as his two brothers have gone off to war. His dad is at home and his sister is at home. They're both struggling to keep it all together. And Ned is dreaming of open water after an incident that happened to him when he was a young child, as his dad and his two brothers went out in a boat to the end of the river mouth, and the raw beauty and power and the whale that he saw is everything that he wants to recapture and understand, and how those actions over the course of that summer come to shape his life, his family life, the rebirth and the death of that valley. And it is maybe one of the most beautiful stories, but also written pieces that I have ever read. This made me cry my eyes out. This broke me, this healed me, this held me. This made me realize that storytelling is the most incredibly powerful thing that we have. Robbie Arnott, in the same way that a photographer takes a photo and then when they go to edit it, puts the contrast and the vibrance and the saturation and the color boost into the photo, he turns it right up with all of his sentences, and it just all feels so raw, so emotional, and so important. And this is my second favorite book of 2025, Limberlost by Robbie Arnott. Whew. I wish I could read this again for the first time, truthfully. I feel like I've got more to say, but I've already spoken about this on another video. I'll link it below in the comments of my 5 must-read Australian novels, and this is definitely up there on that list. And my favorite book of 2025 is The Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. Wow, this actually meets all the characteristics for me for a favorite book. I thought about it long after I turned the final page. I cried. There was raw emotion. It made me inspired as a writer. It made me think about the world in a different way. And I've been talking about it all year. I keep recommending it. I keep suggesting it. I keep trying to get people to read it. And this follows the story of Dominic Salt and his 3 children who live on Shearwater Island, a tiny island not too far from Antarctica. They are caretaking the largest seed bank in the world. Shearwater Island was once full of researchers and scientists, but with rising sea levels, the salts are the only inhabitants left of the island, until during the worst storm the island has ever seen, a woman washes up ashore of Shearwater Island. I'm not going to tell you a whole lot more. I think you need to read it. It is beautiful, it's emotional, it's real. Wild Dark Shore and all of Charlotte McConaughey's work, mind you, almost feels like it speaks to you in this inner kind of level. It feels like it's deeper within your core than anything else that you read. And there are moments where you're reading this and you almost feel like you're third person floating above yourself as you're reading it. It is this really raw, beautiful language. The description of a place and a story and a location, and you can picture every single detail as you read this story because she feels like she gives you that. And there are moments in this book that I can picture almost like I've just watched a movie, and I can't get over it. I can't get over how beautiful and how significant and how real it all feels. And there is not many writers on the planet that can do what Charlotte McConaughey can do, and she did within this novel here. And I will talk about this novel until I stop breathing. Anyway, that's Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. Anyway, they are my favorite books for 2025. Thank you for joining me. I hope you found a new book to read. I appreciate you being here and giving me your time. It is fun to make those lists because I feel like they're valuable. Lists are just a device and it's a fun thing to do, and it's all subjective, but they are my favorite books of 2025. I look forward to seeing what your thoughts are in the comments. So leave them below. Let me know what you think, and I will see you back here next week.